Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of Season 3 of Powered by You, a podcast produced by RBKC in collaboration with Morley Radio. My name is Zino and I'm your host. Today we have an eye-opening conversation in store for you. Hopefully we will explore how violence impacts London from various angles and most importantly understand what efforts are currently in place to tackle those challenges. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our guests. So today we have none other than Lib Peck, the Director of the Mayor of London's Violence Reduction Unit. With a wealth of experience in public service, Lib has been at the forefront of efforts to tackle violence and create safer environments for all Londoners. Prior to her role at the VRU, Lib served as the elected leader of Lambeth Council for 6 years, where she led initiatives to combat violence and promote social cohesion. Her commitment to addressing the root causes of violence has earned her recognition and respect both locally and nationally. Today, Lib joins us to share her insights on the VRU approach and the role of collaboration in creating safer communities. Thank you for joining, Lib. How's it going?
Hi, thanks a lot, Zino. Looking forward to having a conversation. Yeah, good.
Me too. And we also have the lovely Jess from the local community who's very passionate and always up for supporting and volunteering and doing the most she can. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's lovely to be here. I'm looking forward to hearing and learning about what's going on in London and what services are available. Yeah.
Me too. I think we're all here to learn things about each other and you never know what might come out of this podcast. So I thought it would be nice to actually have a short icebreaker moment. So we'll be asking Lib maybe quick 5 questions to understand more about, her as a person, what kind of response she'll give. So let's dive in. Are you ready, Lib?
I think I am.
Okay,
yeah.
Brilliant. So first question is, person you trade places with for a day?
Well, I'm not sure there's one person, but if I had a different life, what I'd absolutely love to do is to direct a play. And we were really lucky a couple of months ago to work with the Globe on their recent production of Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, wow.
And the young people we worked with gave them really good advice about how they should put on the play, what kind of ideas they had for different sets, and I just loved it. And I wasn't really central to it, so it was great fun.
That sounds exciting. So that's your passion almost that you've taken interest in?
Yeah, I mean, I love going and watching plays, put on at big main theatres or local ones, and I just think it'd be fascinating to put it all together and see what you could create. So that's what I'd love to do.
Okay, hopefully it comes to fruition one day. You never know.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Second question is, best compliment you've received?
Well, it's always a compliment, isn't it, when people want to work with you, really, and they like you and want to spend time with you, or even if they love you, So I think those are probably the best compliments, really. It was always quite good. You mentioned in your intro I was the leader of Lambeth, and there was always something that was really validating about being re-elected. So in the time I was a local councillor, I went through 6 different local elections, and
Wow.
I started off with a majority of 5 and ended up with a majority of about 1,000. So those were 6 elections that felt hard fought, and that was a bit of a validation. Yeah,
That's a massive compliment.
Yeah, it felt like a compliment, but I think the compliment is from the people you know best, really, isn't it? And the people you care about. If
No
they care
doubt.
about you.
No doubt. What about you, Jess? What's the best compliment you received?
I'd say that I'm a very good listener,
Ooh.
which is what I intend to do a lot of doing today. So I'm looking forward to it.
Nice move. Okay, so third question. Something you wish you were better at?
Well, now there is a long list for this one, but I think probably it has to be a bit more tech savvy, a bit more able to do social media. I've got 2 daughters who, whenever I just say, "Oh, I can't do that," snatch my phone or get on top of the computer, and although they're helping me out, they, in the process, make me feel like a real dinosaur. So I'd really like to be a bit quicker at that, understand it a bit sharper, and it's a lot we can learn from young people, actually.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think technology is always evolving, and even myself, sometimes I find to have, I've got to upskill myself at times, or just learn about new things that are currently emerging, new social platforms, or how to do the, certain tasks, for example. So yeah, completely understand. So the fourth question would be the worst advice you ever got.
Yeah, thinking about this one, I think possibly the worst advice I ever got was when you become sort of a leader of an organisation, and we talked about being leader of Lambeth or even coming into this role, people assume because you're a woman that you've got to overcompensate, and they tell you things like, don't, show your emotions too much, or, keep it tough, and, make sure that you're not seen as weak. And I think that's terrible advice, actually, absolutely terrible advice, because I think when you're leading something and you feel passionate about something, it's about who you are and it's how you feel. And if you can't express that yourself, then actually you're not normally such a good leader. And we've got to move away from those kind of stereotypes as well. So, I think for me it's being yourself in that role, obviously within limits, but but to show who you are is important.
Of course. That's an important point. I would also say for myself, for example, someone asking to never change is also bad advice, because you're meant to grow and constantly just reflect and see how you could be the better version of yourself, because perfection never exists, right? Completely understand. Okay, so what never fails to make you laugh?
Well, lots of things make me laugh. I really like working in teams that make me laugh.
Right.
And I think it's really important, particularly if you're in a stressful job, to have people around you that, can bring humour into play.
Oh, yeah.
But probably as a TV programme, Gavin and Stacey always makes me laugh. I don't know why. I think the characters are so strong. And that's probably the go-to thing, really.
Gavin and Stacey, I haven't checked that out. I'll probably have a... Is that on ITV or is it...
Well, it was on quite a while ago.
Oh, right.
Yeah. It's set in Barry Island in Wales, and it's got some cracking characters.
Yeah,
and,
it's really fantastic. I think it's on BBC, actually.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, do you watch it yourself?
Good. I have seen it, yeah.
Big fan?
Big fan.
Okay.
I completely concur. It's great. It's a good show.
All right, that's homework for me. I'll check it out later on. And the final question is, what's the best perk of being in the public eye?
Oh, well, yeah, that's quite easy, really. I mean, the best is going out and seeing and meeting loads of people. I used to love doing that in Lambeth, mixing with people who might have achieved in business, mixing with people who are neighbours, going into local community groups, a whole range of different things that are happening. And now to have the privilege of doing that, as in terms of London, I'm going out to all different parts of London that I've not visited, but meeting loads of different people, different characters is just great. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so now you're London-wide rather than hyper-local within a specific borough.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all done. That was really fun. I think that was a nice icebreaker questions that we went through there. So now the main questions, right? Should we start with the first one? It's pretty basic. If you can tell us more about your role as the director of the Mayor of London Violence Reduction Unit.
Yeah, sure. Well, people might not know what the Mayor of London's Violence Reduction Unit is to start off with, I suppose. And it's kind of based on this idea that, we don't want violence to exist in London. And we're never really going to arrest ourselves out of violence. What we need to be doing is looking at the causes and looking at how we can prevent it. And in particular, I think, looking at young people who get caught up in violence, sometimes get pushed into violence, and how we can support them. And so the way we've tried to approach that, first of all, and absolutely fundamentally, is talking to young people, Right. You might have noticed I'm not that young anymore, and it's key. It's really key that I think that we work alongside young people. We hear what makes a difference to them, and through that we have sort of co-produced and thought about what kind of things make a difference. And so that's right the way through from how we can support parents through to what we can be doing in schools, can be working with teachers, what can we be doing with youth workers, and then what we can be doing in those places, those communities that really suffer from much higher levels of violence than elsewhere, and what would make a real difference. So it's all about prevention, really.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting, because you're basically saying everyone has a role to partake in. Yeah. So, and that's really good. And you're saying with violence, it does have a massive impact on how we live our lives, and that also, it has a ripple effect to different people. So from the person who's, vulnerable to potentially being someone who ends up committing an act of violence, and then that also goes on to who's around that person. So whilst you was explaining that, I just remembered looking at the Telegraph. They mentioned that Britain is voted the second most miserable nation in the world. So I was like, do you think violence would actually contribute to that? How big of a factor does violence fit into that? So it just made me think, just whilst you was mentioning the different people that are involved to tackle this issue of violence. So yeah, just interesting that stat came out. It's on the Telegraph actually. Came out earlier last month.
Yeah. I mean, violence obviously is horrific, and it touches loads of different people. And I think you're absolutely right. It's everybody's responsibility. I think it really hits Londoners who aren't even, close to somebody who's, but nonetheless have seen the impact of a teenage murder, for example. That just feels like something that's unacceptable to us as a society. So all Londoners need to be working towards getting rid of violence. But I think in terms of it compared to the rest of other countries,
exactly, yeah,
it's not actually as high. I mean, if you look at the states, you look at the states, for example, levels of violence there are completely out of kilter with the UK. And actually, if you put London in the context of other places around the UK, equally it isn't as high. But in a sense, the point is we want to get rid of it completely.
Of course, definitely.
And when it happens, and it happens to too many people, it is absolutely devastating and affects much more than just the immediate family. It's friends, it's often communities, and that's why we really all have a responsibility to tackle it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely something that needs attention, and it's kind of refreshing to hear you say that London isn't one of the worst cities, whether it's nationally or within Europe or even globally. So that's a good thing. And also on the bright side, the happiest place is voted as Dominican Republic. So you never know if you want to pack your bags, So the second question would be, I'm aware that you have experience within local authority settings and you prioritise addressing violence against women and girls. Could you share some insights into the challenges and successes of that work?
Well, I think violence against women and girls is completely unacceptable, and sometimes it sort of is under the radar a little bit. I think in the last few years it's perhaps got a bit more prominence, very sadly, because of some huge cases, and that gets people talking and gets people thinking. But we again need to be starting off a lot earlier on. There's far too much misogynistic language, there's far too much assumptions being made about what girls should and shouldn't do, there's far too much abuse that doesn't get recorded, and we need to be working alongside girls, empowering them and challenging all that rubbish stuff that goes on in society actually, so that there are safe spaces and people feel safe both online and actually in the street, and so I think there's a huge agenda there that the Mayor's been working very consistently on and we support, but it's really, really important and hasn't had actually the attention that it deserves.
Yeah, because I remember mentioning to Jess about the work that you'd done previously, and I think she was really excited to find out more about that, especially with you mentioned that it's under the radar, it's not really spoken about. So yeah, I think a lot of people do actually feel the same way that you do. So that's also a great thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, growing up in London as a woman, you feel vulnerable, from the get-go. There's always an element of risk just to leave your house because you don't know what's waiting for you or who has a bad intention towards you. So I guess with that, the question I have is what kind of things are in place to help women feel more empowered, help women and girls feel safer in London, or if for example somebody listening to this now is personally being affected or knows of a friend that's being affected, what kind of things can they do to what kind of services are available, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two ways to answer that actually, because I think it's really important that we empower women, but I also think it's really important we tackle boys and men. And so one of the things that we're investing in is in schools, and looking at healthy relationship work, and we're doing that kind of across lots of different London schools, and making sure that what sometimes is taken for granted as a healthy relationship really isn't for a young woman, and the behaviour that boys are displaying isn't positive. So it's kind of getting at that root cause stuff. It's then, I think, we work with a couple of voluntary more than a couple. We work with several voluntary organisations that we fund to do kind of mentoring to young women who are at risk of being caught up in violence or indeed are involved in violence. And that mentor, that one-to-one relationship often really supports a young woman to sort of make their way in the world in a much better and safer place. And then there is, of course, other work that's going on, through the Mayor, which is much more around working with, the police and trying to make sure that they are taking it much more seriously, that the reporting mechanisms are there, and, that the people who are causing women to feel threatened, or much worse than that, are being kind of apprehended and warned. So I think there's a whole range, but certainly in that prevention space, in that kind of thinking about how you stop it happening in the first place, there's a big role for us, but for all Londoners, again, to tackle that culture and make sure that investment's going in really early on.
Okay, that's
amazing.
How do you find that?
Yeah, great. I definitely do feel like from 10 years ago, even how different things. I mean, even when you go on a train, you see on the posters, what you get involved,
like catcalling and what's not appropriate.
Stuff like that, which is so important. It's so important.
Yeah, because we've got to make that behaviour unacceptable, or otherwise, it's just by letting that happen in society, it often contributes to something much worse. And we've all got a right, haven't we?
Of course,
to feel safe,
absolutely,
wherever we go.
Yeah.
Should be the norm.
100%.
Yeah,
should be the norm.
Completely.
So, which leads us to our third question. Evidence shows that responding to homicides alone in London cost the criminal justice system £120 million a year. That's a huge figure. What are the most significant drivers of violence in London, would you say?
I think the biggest long-term factors are things like poverty. You can track communities that are particularly affected by poverty, and young people and families that are, and therefore their sort of, their life chances are sadly, less positive. And poverty plays a big part, and that's something that we can, thinking about in a London way, we can do certain bits around. We can make sure that when we put on youth work activities, we're paying for young people to actually travel there, as well as making sure there's food at that venue. But broadly, that's obviously a big national thing that needs to be tackled. I think the same thing really around sort of people feeling alienated from society. We're doing a big piece of work around schools. And, we've just done some research with young people and teachers and parents about why kids don't necessarily go to school as much as they should. There's quite a high absentee rate. There's also too many exclusions and, a rising level of suspensions in London. And we know kids are safer in school. And some of that is because they feel quite alienated, and school doesn't feel safe to them, doesn't feel relevant sometimes to them. It's not where they feel they belong. And so tackling that idea of alienation, making sure people feel part of things and feel included, is really important. And then there are more obvious, I suppose, drivers like the drugs market, like gangs, social media, which is a key way in which messaging and bullying takes place and really increases the possibility of violence. So all of those things, I think, need to be tackled in the long term, as well as some of the work we're doing now having an impact to deal with it now. Yeah,
that's true. Long term is definitely the key word here. It's not an overnight solution.
No.
I'd say, when you say long term, are we talking 5-10 years?
Well, a lot of what we've touched on is about cultural, societal change, isn't it? And some of that is really long term, finding positive opportunities for young people.
That's true, especially because you mentioned each local authority has different services, so not every local authority operates the same way in terms of what's accessible. So some may have the luxury of having, or the privilege of having certain services and prevention systems in place, and some may not have that in place. So yourself looking at London-wide is obviously a bit tricky, trying to figure out what interventions go where. So that also leads to the next question, would be obviously the VRU has invested in various programs aimed at violence reduction, and currently still invest in these positive opportunities. So how do you ensure that these funds were allocated effectively to initiatives that would yield tangible results, and what metrics do you currently use to measure the success of these programs?
So it's talking a lot to people. It always surprises me that big organisations decide what people actually need and want, but don't actually have the conversation before with them to work out what might be most impactful. So obviously we have a range of data which we can look at through, levels of exclusion, for example, in a particular place, or how many incidents of violence there's been, or whether robbery's going up, and that will give us an indication of where we broadly should be investing. But the key bit, I think, that organisations often miss out is then going and talking to the people who live there, work there, or, you know, setting up schemes for young people that don't involve young people in their creation. All of that has to be part of it. And so we have a young people's action group that we work with. They help us make decisions about investment. We work with youth workers. We have a board of youth workers across London that again help to shape the kind of youth work that we are investing in. We have parenting networks in most of the London boroughs, which is also a good way to access into those parents that feel very frightened for their kids but aren't quite sure where to go. So it's really sort of drawing on that sort of hard percentage kind of information, but it's also tailoring then what people think that they need, and then testing that.
Is that called Parent Champions? When you mentioned
we
about
have got Parent Champions, and that's led to some really interesting work where they think, for example, not enough emphasis is put on fathers. And so we're just beginning to do a pilot of work around, you know, how we can sort of empower fathers more. And it's also led to, you know, more work on training parents around social media, because parents, well, in fact, as I said, is one of my weaknesses, wasn't it? You know, that parents are much less kind of knowledgeable about social media, but they're fearful of it and they know its potential to be destructive. So it's listening to those voices and aligning that with what the statistics are telling us is where we really invest.
The whole concept of the Parent Champions almost sounds like we're going back to basics of how we should be connecting with, you know, your children, and not letting the internet raise them or giving them an iPad or a PlayStation and then disappear into oblivion, and you don't know how they are getting, what they're getting taught, what they're getting told, and then next minute they're doing their own decision making, and you have no kind of influence or shaping opportunity that you had, you know, when they were growing up. So I think the Parent Champions is a wonderful idea.
I think you've just raised a really interesting word though, because it is all about connection. I mean, that's essentially what we find throughout the whole of the work and the constant theme that runs through. So it's about, you know, if you're a young person, you want a strong enough connection with your parent. You absolutely want a strong connection with your peers. You know, very often it's that relationship with a youth worker or a relationship with a teacher that can provide that moment, provide that confidence, or with a mentor, provide that support that then leads you into being able to access something that's much more positive. So connection is a really strong word, and that kind of runs through any work we're doing with parents, all the way through youth work, whether it's the youth workers that we're funding in hospitals to help the kids who come in and have been have suffered the impact of violence, or in custody suites for the kids who've been picked up because they've been interrogated about an incident that has happened, through to, you know, those in the community as well. So connection is a key word.
Yeah. And the young people stuff, is that called My Ends or something? I remember looking at called...
Well, My Ends is really interesting. I'm pleased you brought that up, because that really gets back to that whole philosophy around people who live somewhere and work somewhere probably know most about their local area. And so we set up a programme called My Ends. It's offered to very small neighbourhoods which self-defined. They decided it was their area that needed extra support. So I'm talking about, for example, there's one in London Road, there's one in Cold Harbour in Brixton, there's another one in around the Aylesbury estate in Southwark. So there's about 8 neighbourhoods. And we invited community groups there to come together and put together a bid that said what they would want to do to work with young people in their area to reduce violence, and how they'd get more people involved. Going back to that point that it's everybody's business. Everybody's got to be involved in reducing violence. And we've seen some really excellent results in those
Fantastic.
8 neighbourhoods, and really seen how that kind of flourishes. But that's going back to people who might know what they're doing, but they need more resource. They need some of the stuff that we can support, about connections with different organisations and public bodies. But they've got some of those ideas, and they've got the relationship with the young people that is really key.
Yeah, for sure. What a cool name, just, isn't it? My Ends.
It's cool, man. Oh, it just got me thinking what you were saying, sort of the things that are in place there. Because it's great to hear that all this stuff is going on in the background, you know, because being in the community, you can see the effect of violence. You can see this has happened to so-and-so, but you don't really understand what's going on, what's at play, what's working in the background, you know. But it did make me think, from what you said earlier, in the icebreaker question, you know, you love being creative. And I guess the arts work in so many ways to help with connection, with collaboration, and getting kids off the streets and things like that. So is there anything like that in place, or any kind of work being done towards that, sort of having creative spaces for young people, theatre, things like this to kind of help with it.
So you're absolutely right. You know, some of those connections don't just happen because someone sits in front of a table, do they, and has a conversation with a young person. They normally come about through an activity, and it's normally somebody being stimulated by an interest, and that can be sport, it can be the arts, it can be theatre, it could be anything. And that has the sort of dual thing of, you know, young people are doing something as well as developing different relationships. And so we fund a lot of groups across London, particularly in that space after school, and in holidays, to put on exactly the kind of programmes that you're talking about.
Amazing. So which brings me nicely to the fifth question. Community engagement and listening to the experiences of affected individuals are emphasised as critical components of your approach. How do you ensure that the voices of marginalised communities are heard and incorporated into violence reduction strategies?
We've touched on some of this in a way. So I think it's our young people's group has I was going to say a slogan, but that doesn't do it. That doesn't do it justice. A kind of motto, a core belief: nothing about us without us. And I think that is quite a powerful phrase that they came up with. So we pay our young people, we mentor them, we give them equipment, and they sit alongside us when we're working out which organisations to fund, and they sat alongside us as we developed a strategy. And I think that's really important if your work is about young people, to make sure it's not about them, it's with them.
Right,
you know?
yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
So, and that's a philosophy we've tried to take. So in schools, you know, I've never been a teacher, but I know that teachers play a key role. I need to listen to those teachers and hear what they're saying about their experience. Similarly, I've not been a youth worker, and it would be really, I need to listen to them. So everywhere along, we have sort of tried to keep faith, I suppose, and keep with the people that we're working with, and that's led us to, parenting, which we've talked about, and listening to the voice of parents. I am a parent, so I have got some experience of that. But right the way through to then, what do we need in schools? And some of that is around how do you move from primary to secondary school? What support do you give young people who've been excluded from school or in pupil referral units? How do you develop a culture that tackles things like misogyny that we've talked about?
Right.
How do you, in the community, support youth work?
That's true.
Working with youth workers, and youth workers have said to us, we haven't had much professionalisation over the last 10 years, but we're an absolutely vital part of reducing violence. So setting up a course for youth workers. So there's a whole range, I think, of thinking about the young person's journey and thinking about at what point you can really impact positively and providing confidence and support and making sure that the professionals in that space are aligned and are informing the stuff that we're doing alongside the young people.
That's such detailed explanation. I think that everyone needs to hear that there's so many layers to it, and you can't just give a simple answer. You can go on for days explaining how it impacts everyone at different levels, right? So
that's not you being polite and telling me I've gone on too long.
No. I would say, the last question is basically congratulations on hitting the 5-year mark. I saw that online. My colleague forwarded me the notification. Oh, check this out. The VRU's hit 5 years. So wonder what kind of steps ahead they have. So looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities as well in violence reductions efforts in London, and how do you plan to address those in the coming years?
I mean, just to go back to your first point, the congratulations is, I think, tempered. I think it's really important that we've managed to establish a base and that we are, as an organisation, talking about prevention, investing in prevention, because I do genuinely believe that's the only way you're ever going to reduce violence. But obviously we don't really want to be around in 5 years' time, because we want to have actually reduced violence, working alongside everyone. But going forward, I think there's a big thing about how much we can invest, and that's a national question as well as a London one. I think we've seen services that have really supported young people. I think we've touched on how do you keep making the case for prevention, and making sure that we're not just focusing on arresting people, and we're not just absolutely critical that can be. We've got to be thinking about how we stop that happening in the first place and challenging that. I think there is a big big push on how you make things local and how you involve people and how you listen to people. You know, the young people we work with have gone along to Ofsted. They've spoken to their inspectors about what they need to change. They've gone along to the Department for Education. They've worked with the Met Police. All of those big organisations need to hear the voice of young people, and I feel part of our role is to empower that voice, because unless you've got that in the systems and all of the structures that you're developing, you aren't going to make change. And that is fundamentally what we need to do. We want to make change so that violence is preventable. It doesn't have to be inevitable. So that's our key challenge.
Well, thank you so much for all you do, and you know, your team as well, all the efforts, and you know, hopefully, like you said, you won't be around the next 5 to 7 years. Otherwise, that would mean it's a negative thing, right? If you're trying to reduce violence. Never thought of it about that way, you know. Until you pointed it out. So I think I'm conscious of time. We've come to the end of our conversation. Just any final thoughts before we wrap up?
It was very insightful. Thank you, Lib. That was great. I was just thinking now, you know, what you were saying. It's. I'm happy to hear that there isn't this big disconnect, that you're creating. There's things in place there for people to feel listened to. So people are at every point involved with shaping this, and like you said, it's connection, it's collaboration. Everyone has to get involved and muck in their way. So it's good to hear that there is that in place. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for coming. That's pretty much the end of the episode. If you enjoyed what you watched, you can listen to the podcast on morleyradio.co.uk. Please comment, like and subscribe, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.